It is 7 p.m. Arizona time and Pacific time. My name is Jay Carpenter. I'm the founder of Desert Blockchain, and this is our monthly session where we're going to be talking about, the title is Green Consensus Eco-Friendly Blockchains. And stay tuned because it's going to be much more than that. But primarily, we're going to be focusing on two projects, Chia Network and Filecoin. And we'll be talking about those, and I'm going to explain why we're looking at those particular projects. I'm going to stop screen sharing for the moment and just ask if there are any questions and before we get started from anyone. We are live streaming on YouTube, and if you are joining us via the YouTube live stream, please feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat section. So there'll probably be a few folks joining us. Professor Marchant is joining us right now. And welcome, Gary.
Oh, good evening.
Do you have any questions, Gary, before we get started? Any comments, anything?
No.
Okay, great. All right. I am going to, let's see, Taria's joining us as well. Taria, welcome. We're going to get started. I'm going to screen share. Feel free to jump in, and Jason Horton is joining us as well. I'd like to introduce Jason before we get started. Jason is the co-organizer of Desert Blockchain, and he is also the chief architect and co-founder of Nori. And Nori is, I am proud to say, a very, I consider to be a success out of the innovation and startup space here in Arizona and in Seattle. And they do carbon removal trading platform. So thanks for joining us tonight, Jason. Any questions or comments you would like to make before we get started, Jason?
No, I'm definitely interested in just kind of hearing, about the different, topics that you're going to be presenting about. Cool. At some point, I'd be interested to hear if there are any initiatives on the green native, blockchain platforms. If anybody's trying to kind of doing offsetting or removing of created energy usage or consumption as you go through and, create blocks or transactions. I'm aware of a few different things. I'm just curious what other people's thoughts are on the process there.
Great. Well, we'll have time for discussion at the end. Excuse me. And we can definitely talk about that. And, if you want to we'll definitely put a reference to nori.com, nori.com. Please check them out. It's a very exciting project. And it definitely fits in with our topic tonight. So let me start with the presentation and to screen share. So there are a lot of different projects out there, and there are different consensus mechanisms in addition to what we're going to be talking about tonight. And Algorand is one project that comes to mind that, to my knowledge, is not proof of work or proof of stake or validating and so forth. But I chose to focus on these two projects, Chia Network and Filecoin, tonight, because I think they offer some really interesting alternatives to our consensus mechanisms that most people are familiar with. And basically, the consensus mechanisms that are sort of the standard mechanisms for reaching consensus are proof of work, which I'm assuming most people are familiar with. It's basically doing a mathematical calculation that has no value outside of the calculation to create consensus, to create the blockchain. And I would say proof of work has, excuse me, come under some fire as of late over the last few months regarding the energy burn that's associated with proof of work. And I'd like to say up front that I'm not saying, I don't have a particular position on proof of work in terms of the energy mechanism and burning and so forth. I'm not for it, I'm not against it. I just think that it's come under a sort of a cloud of scrutiny, and many people perceive proof of work as being not only energy wasteful, but also a detriment to the environment. The other major consensus mechanism that's generally talked about is staking. And then there are validators, master nodes, and things like that. But what we're going to be focusing on tonight is something called proof of space-time, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the two projects, Chia and Filecoin, rely on some form of proof of space-time. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the underlying cryptographic elements or primitives of these zero-knowledge proofs and verifiable delay functions. But basically, the key is, whether it's proof of work, staking, validators, proof of space-time, it all boils down to creating some sort of what I would call skin in the game, some sort of, there's something that is required among the participants in order to participate in these blockchain realms. Then we'll talk a little bit about green consensus, and is it green? Is it, how green is it? And we won't totally define that, but it's arguably not as green as you would think. So then we'll summarize and have some open conversations. And I'm really interested in, whether you are participating on the Zoom or whether you're on the live stream, I'm really interested to find out if you have experimented with either Filecoin or Chia. So, all right, I'm going to stop screen sharing. Sorry about this, because I need to refresh the presentation. And I apologize. So I've added some slides recently, and this was not updated. And by the way, this presentation will be available for everyone tomorrow after about 7 a.m. And the links are in the YouTube notes. So you resume screen sharing. Again, my apologies. Okay. So these two projects were created by two, I would say, very talented and noteworthy figures in the decentralized realm. For Chia, this is the project, the next major project for Bram Cohen. And if you're not familiar with Bram Cohen, he is the founder of BitTorrent. And BitTorrent was created, I believe, in the early 2000s, and was accounted for about 40% of the internet traffic at one point, I think in the late 2000s. Very, very popular. It was a decentralized network. And actually, BitTorrent, as we'll talk about a little bit later, was the inspiration for both of these projects. And so it was really one of the first very successful peer-to-peer file sharing networks. And I've referenced two lectures from the respective founders. One is by Bram Cohen at Stanford, and the other is by Juan Benet of Protocol Labs, the other talented founder, and who again was inspired by BitTorrent. And I would highly recommend you take a look at both of these lectures, because they really set out some fundamental considerations, not only for Chia and Filecoin, but also for the entire decentralized web and ecosystem that we're all interested in seeing move forward. So let's see, somebody's mentioning a project called Nano for low energy blockchains. And they're mentioning that on the YouTube live stream. So here's a couple references. And the thing to keep in mind is that there are two founders that are really committed to the decentralized web, and they both have a strong influence on each of these projects. So this is where Chia is at in terms of price. It's currently around, actually, I was looking at it just a few minutes ago, it's about $300 per Chia. It got up to, I believe, $1,200 or so. And this is a project that just went live on March the 19th of 2021. And Filecoin went live less than a year ago in October. I believe it was October 15th of 2020. So both of these are relatively new projects, and both of them have seen enormous growth in terms of the amount of storage that's associated with each of these projects, and also, the following for each of these. So this is an introductory video for Chia, and it does a good job of kind of illustrating what happens with Chia. And hopefully you can see my pointer, but basically this is a mechanism that creates consensus by storing basically non-usable data. So it doesn't have any use besides creating this consensus algorithm on hard drives, or excuse me, not hard drives, but whoops, didn't mean to start the video. Not hard drives, but storage media. It could actually be run, it's my understanding, using tape drives. So that's pretty interesting. Let's close this. Sorry. So Chia basically writes this information that really has no useful purpose other than to take up disk or storage space. And then as we'll go into a little bit later, the consensus and your chance of earning Chia is based upon the amount of storage that you've dedicated to the Chia network for storage. And this can be overwritten when you find some more useful purpose for the space that's being taken up by the Chia, what's called plotting. So don't worry about figuring all that out at this point. A key thing to keep in mind is that the Chia network is designed simply to use excess capacity in storage media. According to Bram Cohen, it does not make sense for people to just go out and buy storage media and try to profitably farm Chia using storage media that's not going to be used for any other purpose besides the Chia network. So it's really designed to utilize and leverage excess storage capacity. And you can watch this video after this via the presentation. So now let's go to Filecoin. And Filecoin is somewhat similar, except it is utilizing useful data or data that could be used in order to create consensus. And there's a whole retrieval, and then there's a proof of space-time associated with Filecoin, but it is different than Chia because the storage of data is used for just like we use any other data when we store our files on any kind of storage medium. And Filecoin, by the way, has a rather large market cap, I believe about $5 billion now. It shot up to about 15 billion and was over $200 a Filecoin, and started around, I don't know, in the low single digits, and basically has gotten quite a bit of adoption and price appreciation. Now everything has moved back, obviously, but there has been quite a bit of interest in Filecoin. And by the way, both of these projects have been well financed in order to get them started. So here is a video by Juan Benet talking about Filecoin, how it works, some of the key considerations. You can watch this as well. But this circles back to the inspiration for both Chia as well as Filecoin, which is BitTorrent. And this talks about how, Bram Cohen creating BitTorrent and some of the considerations. You can see about midway through the page that programmer Bram Cohen, a student at the University of Buffalo, created this in 2001, and it was very successful. It was sold to, I believe in 2018 for about $140 million to, I think it was Justin's son. So it is a separate project from Bram Cohen at this point, as far as I'm aware. One thing that is valuable to take away from some of the talks by Bram Cohen about Chia is that he was also involved with something called Mojo Nation, which was a project that was designed to incentivize file storage similar to Filecoin. And Bram Cohen has some considerations that he views as vulnerabilities in the whole idea of incentivized, decentralized file storage. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong or anything else. I'm just saying that Bram Cohen has alluded to some key considerations regarding the incentivization of people to store files in a decentralized manner. I don't know the details of that, but as you're watching his videos, I would recommend that you take a look at that. And in addition, Bram Cohen also talks about some of the vulnerabilities in his view of both proof of work as well as proof of stake. And I found those to be very interesting. But here's kind of a general description of the Chia network and some of its history. He's actually been working on this for several years and considers the Chia network to be, well, first of all, it's heavily inspired by the Bitcoin network, but Bram Cohen considers the Chia network to be sort of the next generation of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystem. So that's a key consideration when you're looking at Chia Network. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so here's a similar overview of Filecoin. This is a project that's been in the works since 2015. It took a long time to do the fundamental work to launch Filecoin. They raised, I believe, is about, well, somewhere between $200 and $250 million in order to fund the development of Filecoin. And again, it was just launched back in October. Now, I'll stop there for a minute, ask if there's any questions, any comments before I move forward. Someone is asking, what are Chia's hardware requirements to run a node, and what's the energy per transaction? And that's being asked in the chat for the live stream. We're going to talk a little bit about the hardware requirements. Jose is on the Zoom session, and I've asked Jose to share his experience with farming Chia. I'm going to share my experience. The hardware requirements, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but there's two pieces to Chia. One is you form a plot, and I'll talk about how that works. And two is then you farm that plot. And the hardware requirements for those two functions are considerably different. For the plotting, you really need a fast solid state drive. For the farming, you can get by with basically old hard drives that are sitting around. And there are some validation and challenge metrics and parameters to keep in mind when you're farming Chia, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I will reference a video that shows you how to set up a Chia network, both for plotting and farming. You can actually do Chia on, you can set up Chia on a Raspberry Pi. That's something that I have not done yet, but I'm very interested to basically plot and farm Chia on a Raspberry Pi. In terms of Filecoin, much more robust requirements. You need like 128 gig of RAM, and there's some pretty hefty requirements in order to mine Filecoin. But let's talk about a little, well, I'll pause once again to see if there's any questions or comments. So both of these projects rely upon some very advanced, well, let's say these cryptographic constructs have been around for a while, but they've really just over the last few years started to become refined and started to be incorporated into actual working projects. One is a verifiable delay function, or VDF, and that is particularly used in the Chia network. And here's a reference to a paper explaining verifiable delay functions. But here's the best way to think about a verifiable delay function. And this was explained at a blockchain conference at Stanford University. It's, in my mind, this is a great way to think about this. But the idea is to have some sort of cryptographic way to assure that a certain amount of time has passed. And in this case, imagine you've got a jigsaw puzzle laid out on a table. It's all scrambled apart, and you know it's going to take a certain amount of time to put enough pieces together before you can discern what the image is of that puzzle. And in a very simplified way, that's what a verifiable delay function does. And it turns out that has some very valuable uses. So in not only creating consensus, but also in some other applications as well. The other thing that's key and in particular to Filecoin is something called zero knowledge proofs. And this is a way to prove something without disclosing what that something is. So that might sound a little odd, but how can you prove that there's an example might be, when somebody goes to a restaurant or a bar and you present your identification card. Right now, the person that's part of the establishment looks at your driver's license and says, okay, I see your birth date. I can calculate that you're of age and so forth. With a zero knowledge proof, there would be another way to prove that a person is of age without disclosing their actual birthday. So that becomes very valuable as well. And here's a way to think about a zero knowledge proof. This is the old Where's Waldo puzzle. So if I projected this puzzle in a little bit better detail and everybody could look at it, it would take people a while to find Waldo in this puzzle. Now, let's say that I knew or somebody knew the type of shirt that Waldo was wearing or something that was written on Waldo's shirt. If, for instance, Jason said, hey, Jay, I know where Waldo's at, and Waldo's wearing a blue shirt with the number 23 on it. If I knew that was correct, I would have a very high probability of reliably saying that I know that Jason has found Waldo in this puzzle, and even though he's found Waldo, he has not revealed the exact location of Waldo. It turns out that becomes a very useful way to enable this proof of space-time, as well as other things that become extremely valuable in my view. And I've actually done a presentation on decentralized voting using zero knowledge proofs, and it opens up some pretty exciting use cases and so forth. So I'll pause there and ask if there's any questions regarding either verifiable delay functions or zero knowledge proofs. And we're not going to go into how that works for proof of space-time, but in other words, proving that a certain amount of storage has been on a storage medium for a certain amount of time. But suffice it to say, those are the two of the cryptographic elements that enable this proof of space-time. Let's see. Okay. So when I first saw Chia, I thought, well, this is an interesting way to generate decentralized consensus that's using something besides proof of work, proof of stake, validation, so forth. And it was interesting, but not particularly exciting. I started to get excited about Chia when I watched this video on the underlying programming language that's behind Chia, which is called Chia Lisp. And what Chia Lisp does, and if you watch this video, there's a demonstration of some of the functionality. But basically, Chia Lisp and the functionality behind Chia ushers in a new realm of what most people would understand as like smart contracts. In the Chia network, it's characterized as smart coins. Everything's a coin within the Chia network. But in terms of like multi-signature applications and logic and all the functionality that we associate with the Ethereum network, Chia is introducing similar functionality with in a different way. In fact, the developer who did this particular video was an Ethereum developer and makes some comments about how Chia Lisp works relative and the developer experience of Chia Lisp versus Ethereum. Now, one thing to caution, Lisp has been around for a very long time. It's a functional programming language, which I like a lot. And however, there is the drawback to Chia and the Chia network in terms of learning how to program and create things is learning Lisp and functional, to some degree, functional programming. So any questions about that before I move on? Okay, so if you're interested in getting started with the Chia network, this is a well done, in my view, video on how you can set up a Chia plotting and farming setup or system, and it doesn't take very long, and you can start the bare bones basics fairly quickly. It does take some time in order to create a plot, and then there are significant caveats to make sure that your farming setup is set up in a way so that you've got a shot at earning some Chia. But this is a good introduction that I've used and I refer to when I'm setting up my systems for Chia. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to stop the screen share and we'll kind of open it up for discussion and conversation and so forth. So any questions at this time? I'll share with you my experience with, and by the way, we've talked a lot about Chia, and it is, sort of the newest platform and initiative on the block. If you go back through our videos and our sessions for Desert Blockchain, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about Filecoin, and we did a session with on Powergate with Andrew Hill, which is a way to do some interesting programming with the Filecoin network and Protocol Labs and the interplanetary file system. So Jose, who's on the Zoom, was kind enough to loan me this 2 terabyte SSD USB drive. And my recommendation is you should try plotting and farming Chia with at least creating your plots with at least a 4 terabyte SSD drive. And I'm going to find that out tomorrow when I get my SSD drive. But I had my plotting attempts both failed about 11% through the plotting exercise. So if you look online, you'll find that there are other people that are having problems with the plotting functionality of the Chia network. And in addition, the heating involved was pretty considerable as well. So, Jose, would you mind sharing with us what your experience has been with playing with Chia and so forth?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Jay. Good evening, everybody. My first attempt at plotting Chia was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. I did succeed plotting on that very same 2 terabyte drive. But see, from the moment that I did it until you started it, the hardware requirements or the storage requirements went up. So that's a sign that just because something works today, it does not mean that they will work for you now or later. A recent article that I saw was mentioning that a decent configuration to start up will run at about $2,600, which might include a 10 terabyte SSD drive. But just keep in mind that, just speaking on behalf of my own self, if you are thinking of farming Chia just to make money, well, good luck. Whoever is watching this video has already watched all the other videos, so get ready for serious competition out there. But back to Jay's question. So I started about 4 weeks ago. I am running a dated desktop. It's 4 or 5 years old, a Core i7 with 16 gigs of RAM on it. It took me about 1 week to set up the plot. Next, I transferred the hard drive to a Raspberry Pi. This whole process took me 1 hour to transfer it. And even though the plot was already there, it took me longer than a day to update it. So the processing requirements are not as intense for farming, but your network requirements are going to be huge. And yes, get ready to have a fan near your hard drive because it's going to get warm.
Exactly. And thank you, Jose. Let me elaborate on what we're talking about in terms of plots and versus farming, because I didn't really cover that. But a plot is described by Bram Cohen as like creating bingo cards. So, but I like to think of it like, imagine you on your living room floor, you're able to print enough bingo cards to cover your living room floor or some portion of it. That coverage constitutes your chance of earning a Chia farming reward. However, I believe the Chia network has over 2 exabytes of storage out there. So that's like, you know, your chance of having the winning bingo card with like the entire city of Phoenix, Arizona, or Los Angeles all having you know, an equal set of bingo cards. So it's becoming your chances of earning Chia are becoming are going down until you figure out a way, like Jose and I have tried, to create more plots to that you can then farm, which increases your chances of earning Chia.
Yes, and just to add to that, it is highly recommended that you create more than one plot.
Absolutely.
Each plot is about 100, 105 gigs, so it's not that much. You can even have those plots stored on a just a plain old hard drive. But for the synchronization and consensus uh, processes, that's where you're going to need a whole lot of SSD space.
Mhm. Yeah, so, and this analogy just came to me, but you could think of your SSD drive that Jose's talking about. Let's say you've got a 10 terabyte SSD drive that's fast. That's like kind of like your bingo card printer. And the more powerful the printer, the more bingo cards you're going to be spitting out of that thing. Once the bingo card is printed and created, you can lay it sort of passively on the floor, which represents, your hard drive, which doesn't have to be fast, doesn't have to be, high capacity or anything else. So there's two components to this Chia ecosystem. One is you want to create these plots or bingo cards, if you will, as fast as possible and as many as possible. But the second part is once you've got the bingo cards, then you can lay those out and have them available for farming, as they call it, on slow, antiquated storage media, and and still have a shot at earning Chia. The other key consideration is that they don't, and I could be wrong on this, they might have just introduced it, but they don't have farming pools yet. And that's a really important piece of the equation, because I anticipate that once farming pools are available, then it's going to be more attractive to create plots on your storage media that is sort of like excess space on your storage media. Any comments, questions, so forth? Okay, somebody says, I'm not getting a clear picture of the actual energy consumption of either Chia or Filecoin and what exactly makes them green when compared to other low energy blockchains such as ETH, proof of stake, and Nano, and so forth. Okay, that's a great question. I would say that from what I know, and I'm still fairly new to this, but the energy requirements is not as green as we would like it to be at this point. I think there's a significant amount of computation power that needs to go into both Filecoin as well as Chia. And there are some pieces there are articles written on the eco-friendliness of Chia and probably Filecoin as well, so you can take a look at those. But the point is that this consensus mechanism that Chia and Filecoin are using is utilizing something that has other uses besides just running a calculation like proof of work. In terms of the consensus, and why I'm not talking about proof of stake in this conversation, which arguably is more eco-friendly, and I would recommend you listen to Bram Cohen's lectures, and I tend to think that he's right, but proof of stake is questionable if it's really decentralized. And so that's the big consideration there. You have any comments, Jose?
Yes, I just like to bring some context here. When you're talking about being eco-friendly, energy consumption, etc., I just like to remind everybody that whenever you perform a Google search, one Google search, it's equivalent to of 17 seconds of a 60-watt light bulb. or 23 trees. So I cannot compare the energy consumption to a Google search. I can tell you that for the week that I had it running here in my home office, well, I have AC from home. I did have an extra fan on my desk just because I feel hot. But otherwise, it was running off of my desktop PC with no additional power, and also running from a second week running from a Raspberry Pi that was connected to the regular power outlet through a 5-volt cable. So it's let's say that as of this month, the energy consumption is not as significant. Next month, we'll see.
Great, thank you, Jose. And it's also important to keep in mind, at least with the Chia network, that it's utilizing storage capacity that's already there that's just not being used. And the idea is that, part of your storage media should be used for conventional file storage and so forth. In terms of Filecoin, it's probably comparable to the energy required for cloud storage providers, your Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud, so forth. So that's sort of the argument or the line of thinking, is that whatever energy is associated with either Chia or Filecoin is energy that would be expended, or comparable energy that would be expended, no matter what, for file storage, basically, or capacity. Okay, so another comment from the chat. Interesting. My understanding about Filecoin is that it is quite centralized geographically as well as numerically due to node requirements. And I think that could actually be correct. So there, it's all of these are subject to different viewpoints, and it's not cast in stone in terms of what exactly is so. I would recommend that you consider that both Filecoin and Chia are early in their life cycle, and the probability is that there will be more efficient processes as time goes on and more time and attention is spent refining these networks. So Jason, did you want to talk about your question? Put it out there. Restate it again, please.
Yeah, so the question that I was, or I don't know, it's really kind of just a general topic of, a different approach to, keeping things carbon negative or carbon neutral, is to, allow for emissions to be created as they normally are. However, make up for those emissions as they're created, or even more so than that. So one approach to doing something like that is by offsetting the carbon footprint of the energy footprint required to generate or propagate a block on let's say the Bitcoin network. And then on some of these blockchains like the Filecoin network, or I'm not sure about Chia, but Ethereum for sure, that you have the concept of like smart contracts where you can kind of embed the logic into the execution of different types of transactions. And so if you combine those two ideas, you can achieve carbon neutrality via all of your transactions by creating purchases, or by participating in exchanges for carbon offsets or carbon removals, and kind of just certifying that as the transaction's happening. So kind of embedding that natural transaction logic into your everyday blockchain transactions. So if you spend, X amount of energy propagating one block, it also at the same time could create the same carbon offset in the real life, certify that, put it on the blockchain, et cetera. So I'm just kind of curious, what people's thoughts really are kind of on that topic.
I think that's an interesting dimension that I hadn't considered, is that you can actually, when you've got a Turing complete, and maybe you don't even need it to be Turing complete, chain or ecosystem, then you can add to the computational mix a consideration for whatever that would be needed to make it carbon neutral. That's interesting. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, effectively. It's always interesting to see these different consensus mechanisms at play. Like there's definitely value, for instance, with like Filecoin's network, there's added utility and value in like a decentralized storage network. The consensus mechanisms are interesting as well. Same goes for proof of stake and proof of work. They all kind of play a different role, but I wonder often, what the trade-off for some of these things are, where you could probably achieve similar types of impacts or effects without having to sacrifice, the pros of one consensus mechanism over the other. So proof of stake or proof of work might not have to necessarily sacrifice anything there in order to achieve, carbon neutrality for some of these things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would say it's important because right now, proof of work, chains and so forth kind of have a public relations issue to deal with. So, bringing up that point, I think to some degree could neutralize the concern over the environmental impact of some of these perceived high energy blockchains and consensus mechanisms. So I don't know, but we have had several sessions on Nori and how it works and the carbon removal versus carbon trading approach to creating some of these neutral constructs or ways to balance out whatever energy is being spent that might be dirty energy or so forth. There are new ways, and Nori is one of them, to start to balance out those needs. So let's see, we've got a bunch of comments. Okay, Nakamoto coefficient is one way to, and by that I believe you're talking about the nonce that's being calculated, is one way to quantify decentralization. Would be interested to see the Nakamoto consensus for those networks and which way it trends over time. Interesting question. I don't have an answer. And, there are ways to track the storage as well as, I believe, the energy consumption of each of these platforms and ecosystems. So keep an eye on that. And then carbon offsets are a great idea, but I think in practice there are a few good examples. There are few good examples of it working in the real world, hard to quantify and verify. And that's really where Jason's an expert. You've spent I think 3 or 4 years at least, like full time, looking at how do you verify and how do you basically remove gaming incentives around carbon removal or carbon sequestration. So anything you want to say about the state of the art in terms of the verification, tying the real world to the digital world, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the trickier problems. It's certainly one that I don't think we've conquered in like a way that is purely automated through something like smart contracts, where you can kind of let something go in a pure, DeFi sense of the the concept here. But the one thing that you can do with any blockchain or any smart contract based system that allows you to kind of associate real world identities with some of these things using attestations or other identity components, you can certainly tie identities to verifications. So if you've got independent verifiers of real world events, oracles are one concept, although oracles kind of have a problem of like sort of like the permissionlessness of oracles and creating the right incentives there. There's a whole bunch of complexity and different ways of going about it. But if you've got something as simple as just like an independent verifier with a real world identity who is putting their effective, their self on the in the scrutiny of the public, and they're attesting to these things, you can take legal recourse against such people if they were trying to game the system. There's other recourse through different things like that. It really is just a game of identity is what it is. But then when it comes to like penalizing certain actions, then you can start to rework in the automated nature of smart contracts using like if they have to stake up some money to participate in a game, and then they're caught cheating by the rest of the network, you can have that kind of be penalized through some kind of smart contract and Oracle system, or there's a whole bunch of different ways really, but it's definitely a tricky problem. And I think the best way right now that we have, or at least that I've seen, is through just tying identity to attestations on chain. So an identity associated with the blockchain transaction effectively.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jason, because decentralized identity, I would say, is one of the key missing pieces out of the entire decentralization movement. And you're talking about reputation as well as decentralized identity. And there is a talk by the same fellow who did the talk on Chia Lisp about Chia and decentralized identity. And he brings up some great points in general, and how Chia is interested in incorporating new ways to create decentralized identity. So that's definitely on the radar for Chia, as well as colored coins. I didn't go into that much, I'm still getting my arms around the colored coin concept, but colored coins look akin to NFTs, but a little more generalized, but kind of a subset of the Chia coin itself. Maybe a little more fungible, but I'm guessing that NFTs, non-fungible tokens, could probably be created using Chia Lisp and some of the logic that's built into the Chia network and architecture. So let's see, I think that's about it for this evening. Thank you all so much for participating. And, we're definitely interested in alternative ways to create consensus that it's an alternative to proof of work. And again, I'm not saying proof of work is good or bad. It's definitely opened the horizons for all of this to happen. But these new green consensus is definitely interesting. And these two projects, I think, are, at least in my view, are worthy of keeping track of. Jose, did you want to say something?
No, I'm good. Just wanted to thank you and congratulate you on this wonderful presentation. I'd like to thank thank Jason and all the participants, including especially you who's watching us over YouTube.
Yep. Our next session will be on July 28th at 7 p.m. Arizona and Pacific time. and we will be announcing a topic, in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. And if you have some suggestions on topics, please feel free to contact me or post them on Meetup and so forth. But that concludes this evening. We might, as we get into it a little bit more on the functionality of the Chia coin, we might have a session on that, just kind of doing a demonstration of what the functionality is at this point, which I think would be a lot of fun. So if you're watching this and you're a Chia expert and you would like to participate in an upcoming session, please let me know, Jay Carpenter. And on that note, we will say goodnight and end exactly on time. So thank you very much.
Yes, and by the way, if you made a ton of money by farming Chia, just remember who gave you the idea.
That's right. Jose gladly accepts tips of gratitude and monetary reward. So thank you.